and I'm going to be preaching a sermon series on summer school, is that there are things that we ought to know that we don't know. And the gap between knowing those things and ought to knowing them, and as that widens, the older we get, the part where we've really passed the point of no return, we should have known it for years now, and we've failed to make it a priority, and it catches up with us. Well, that's true in a lot of ways. I have a friend in the church who says, third grade was the best 4 years of my life. And I think that because in school we see it, where somebody's not getting the grades so they don't pass the grade, we sometimes translate that, or can translate that to life, that there are things that we're not knowing well enough, and then we get to a place where we're supposed to accomplish something, and those rudimentary skills don't come to us. We can't recall them. Well, that's exactly how this has worked in our Christian faith. A couple of examples before we get to the facts of our faith. Some examples would be the ability to read. And surprisingly, there are 32 million Americans who are illiterate. And that's not just speaking of English as a second language. That's people, as the ABC News presented about illiteracy, people who are everyday people, that they struggled to graduate high school, they faked tests, or they figured out how to get around certain quotas, and or they didn't graduate high school, they dropped out, and now the inability to read, as simple as this, to read road signs and know what direction they're going, and to read food labels, or to make a recipe, to look on the internet and look things up. To not be able to read is in many ways debilitating. The other part is that 21% of adults in America have a fifth grade or below reading level. We struggle for those individuals to do basic functions in the world in which we live. But you wouldn't know that meeting them. And as ABC presented, it was much easier at a point to just pretend like you knew than to admit what you didn't know, because you had now come to an age you ought to know. And the gap between what you ought to know and what you did know had become so grand and so large that they just try to pretend and get by. Well, the same might be true of simple tasks that we do. I mean, if you're an adult male and you don't know how to check your oil in the car or change a tire. I remember in high school, a tire went out, and I went to change it, and I jacked the car up, and I began to take the wrench to get the nuts off the tire, and the car tipped the jack over. Apparently, come to learn, you're supposed to loosen all those bolts before you jack the car up, because when you put that torque on that wrench, it's going to pull it off the jack. So, lesson learned. Those are things that I think people know today that you should be able to do, but what if you didn't? Or as some of you ladies, what if you didn't know how to hem a shirt, or you didn't know how to make mac and cheese? Just some simple cooking skills. Now, I made those gender specific because it really is our stereotypes. It's probably not as embarrassing for a woman in our society to not be able to check the oil in the car, or for a man to not be able to hem the shirt. So the point being that what we ought to know, even by stereotypes, what people expect you to know, if you don't know that, then it becomes more embarrassing for you. Now, there are some androgynous activities that we struggle at altogether. Balancing a checkbook. 61% of the people in our culture today don't balance their checkbook. It kind of surprised me, but the question is, how many don't know how? And we stumble through some of these basic understandings of our society not knowing them. And I think that's true of the Christian faith. There are things that we ought to know as Christians, that we ought to do and practice as a church, that we don't. And I think sometimes as a pastor or as churches, we harp on the fact that we don't do these things as if people are just choosing not to. And it dawned on me getting towards this summer that maybe there are some of those questions we haven't asked because we're embarrassed to. And the reason we don't do things as a church or in our lives as believers is because we're not sure how. So this summer we're going to have the opportunity to ask those questions. And if you have them, I would encourage you to email, maybe get a Facebook conversation going, asking questions about your faith and about life and through a perspective that God would now offer to you. And the reason that this is important is that we've been sharing about our conversations to be a community that asks. More than anything else, we don't want to be a church that knows all the answers and then has cookie-cutter solutions to all these hot topics in our world today. We want to ask the deeper questions. Why does this matter? Because two things are going to happen. One, you're going to gain knowledge about something, and then two, understanding. Understanding is where behavior changes. The way you live is improved because you understand the knowledge you know. So two things have to happen. You have to learn about what it is that you're curious about, a way of life that you're hoping to implement, and then you have to understand its benefits in your life. See, everybody knows that you should be able to balance your checkbook and you should manage your money, but what most people don't understand is the value that holds in their life, that they have a discipline for spending money, that they don't have financial crisis because they have no money left in the bank or in a savings account. They just spend and accrue debt, and then it's too late. Well, those sort of things are true about our Christian faith as well, that whether we want to know about sexual purity or we want to know about our own financial stewardship and what it means to be charitable or what it means to provide for our family, what it means to interact in conflict and relationships that are frustrating, or to share your faith if you feel insecure about how to share your faith. Maybe those are some of the questions you've had. Those are the questions that we're going to be talking about this summer. Today I just want to begin with one simple premise. We want to be a people and a church willing to ask. Have the courage. Take the time. There are plenty of places that we ask questions. I mean, think about this. How many questions have you had this week, this last month, that you've actually gone to the Bible for answers, or to a spiritual mentor, or someone you believe had a perspective from God to answer that question? In our culture today, when we have questions, we ask Google. We go to Facebook. We might post it to some friends. But to really ask from a perspective of spirituality, it seems to be, again, the gap that is growing, that God is all-knowing, and yet we're not sure about how to ask, or it's too embarrassing, or too humbling, or, quite frankly, just too apathetic. There's things that we've created in society that give us quick answers, like the internet, and since God doesn't give them as quickly, we cease to go to Him for answers. Well, in the Bible, it says a couple of things, that there is a purpose to asking God. In Deuteronomy 32:7, ask your fathers and they will inform you, inquire of your elders and they will tell you. In other words, ask your parents, and what they were to ask is about the Exodus. How were we a people in bondage, and how were we set free? And retell that story, because if God did it then, God can do it today, and God will do it for future generations. Even Jesus was asking questions. Luke chapter 2:46, that he went into the temple, and it says, Joseph and Mary discovered Jesus in the temple, sitting among the religious leaders, listening to them and asking questions. The next verse is about how they were amazed at what he knew. But we realize first, he's asking questions. Jesus himself wasn't afraid to say, how does this work? Why do you think? And gain perspective. Of course, Matthew 7:7 and 8 is going to be our signature verse for this series. Keep on asking and you will receive what you have asked for. Keep on seeking and you will find. Keep on knocking and the door will be open for you. For everyone who asks receives. Everyone who seeks finds. And everyone who knocks, the door will be open. And it doesn't mean that it's going to be the answer you were looking for. That's part of the challenge of asking God. Is sometimes when we seek answers from the Lord, His response isn't what we expected. It doesn't say ask and you will receive exactly what you wanted. It doesn't say knock and the door will be open to the direction you choose. It just says that if you ask, you will get an answer. So we should ask. This is the challenge. This is the joy of who we are. At no point are you beyond the realm of knowledge that you can't ask, that you've achieved this all-knowing ability. Went on a bike trip with my friend and mentor Daniel Messner, and I go in every one of these meetings with him asking questions upon questions. In fact, I feel like that little troublesome friend who is always harping about something else. Well, what do you think? How would this work? What do you know? And of course, I ask him about the church, and I ask him about how we do ministry, and about the finances, and about evangelism, about being more of a community source as a church to advocate for our community and for the Lord on the Lord's behalf. And I ask all these questions, and on the way, it dawned on me at one point that even Daniel had questions. Now, his were probably less significant, but his questions went like this. What's the weather going to be like tomorrow for our bike ride? What direction is the wind coming out of? Hey, can you put that on Facebook? And what I realized is that Daniel, and he'll appreciate this if he sees this at some point, is that I didn't realize they still made rotary cell phones. You know, it was jing. His phone's a little outdated. So apparently, he wanted to know things that, as my phone afforded, the apps that I have, could look up instantaneously. It seems so frivolous and so small, but it reminds me in the sermon that we are always at a place where there's something we don't know. Even as the older we get, and I know that too. I've had my children. I've had to ask them to fix my phone or to help me with some form of technology. It represents a willingness to continue to learn. And I think if we've lost that, then in many ways we've lost touch with our faith, with who God has designed us to be a people of discovery, of asking questions. James says it best, James 4:2. You want what you don't have, so you scheme. He even points out you even kill to get it. You're jealous of what others have, but you can't get it. So you fight to take it away from them. Yet you don't have because you don't ask. When we can't scheme and get the answers for ourselves, we find a void in life. And believe it or not, even in the church, we struggle with this desire to find the answers ourselves. I can figure this out. I'll take care of it. And we're trying to essentially cover up a gap of not knowing. Because as you become a Christian and you grow in your faith, years go by and you realize you didn't know that Joan of Arc wasn't the wife of Noah. You didn't know that that wasn't in the Bible. You didn't realize that you should know, at least to some extent, that Jesus and the stories of the gospel aren't in the Old Testament. That the story of Daniel is hundreds of years before the time of Christ, or that you want to be able to look into the epistles to specific verses, whether it be Philippians 4:13 or 1 Corinthians 13. You want to be able to look those up and know them, and you feel like if you are a Christian for as long as you've been, you should know those answers. Well, stop. Stop in that moment and just say, what would change in your life if you had the boldness to ask? To ask God. To learn His Word. To learn from others. And then to live out those behaviors in life. And even as you feel a novice and you're pedaling a bike for the first time, you might stumble and fall, but you get back up and you say, I'm trying to apply something that I should have known for years. But I finally needed the courage to ask. The professor said in his, walked into his classroom, and all the students, for the first day of class, they sat in their seats, and the professor walked in, sat down, didn't say a word. The class was an hour and 10-minute class, and 10 minutes went by, and 20 minutes went by. A couple of students, actually, because the professor hadn't said anything, they just scoffed, they got up, and they left. The professor still didn't say anything. Finally, with about 10 minutes left of class, one of the students looked at the professor and, with the tone, said, Are we going to learn anything? And that was the moment the professor got up and said, yeah, what do you want to know?